All right, thank you, Brad. I think I'm going to pull this loose. There we go. Thanks, everybody. Really happy to have y'all in Austin today, including the folks that were already here. But so I'm just going to dive right into it. That's a lot to follow with that game earlier, but I think you'll see we rolled a lot of 1s and 6s over the last few years. Just to get into it with a little bit, just the main thing I would take off here is y'all can read it, but we serve over 1 million customers, both water, wastewater, and we have reclaim system. Two, fundamental, a couple of things on this slide. Austin has water rights and long-term contracts to twice as much water as we're actually using, but that water has to be in the lakes because we only have one source of water. That's pretty environmentally sound, we think, to get the water from the river that goes through your town, but as you'll see as we go through this, it can be risky too, but so it's the Colorado River that goes through town, and then it's dammed up in the Highland Lakes. And there's, of course, a different Colorado than goes through further west. I probably don't have to really tell that to this crowd. And with the Lower Colorado River Authority, they manage the river, and that's who we have our long-term contracts with. We also have a conservation measure that was written into the contract where that we don't have to start, we prepaid, and we don't have to start paying them again until we hit 201,000 acre feet for 2 years in a row. And that used to be 2017, 2019 projected, and now it's projected for the 2030s because of our conservation. And Austin's y'all probably have heard or whatever, it's a pretty environmentally minded city, environmentally minded populace. So Austin Water has gotten with the program over the years, 43,000 acres of land that Austin Water manages between the water quality protection lands, mainly protect Barton Springs, Balcones Canyonland Preserve, protects both our drinking water supply and endangered species through a permit with the federal government. We're also really proud of our Hornsby Bend plant. That's a biosolids where the solids from our wastewater plants go. It's no discharge right by the Colorado River, methane cogeneration, and produce dillo dirt there. We mix the yard waste in from and that's a long story. We're going to have to change that because they're doing food composting now too. But we just also last Saturday celebrated, or 2 Saturdays ago, 60 years of bird watching there with the Travis Audubon Society. Okay, so just some of the things when we started focusing on climate change, we're more on the mitigation side, although we always studied climate models and looked at adaptation, but did water conservation, as you know, a very direct way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, looked at energy efficiency. We signed up with Austin Energy's Green Choice, renewable energy program. The one on reducing vehicle and equipment fuel use, that's really the most difficult one because in a lot of instances for the bigger trucks and equipment out in the field, some of the battery technology is just not there yet. Be very open to anything y'all know that I might not on that. Our conservation program started in the 80s. That was more aimed at capacity in the plant. So when demand got up close to capacity, there would be ask people to cut back on their water, and so not very aggressive. The 90s started doing incentive programs and that kind of thing, and then in 2006 we got a lot more serious about it, really starting in 2006, 2007. This is an important one here. We had, if y'all paid any attention to Austin, I know that other people from around Texas probably know this, we have a lot of civic disputes. I know everybody does, but we were particularly vehement about it sometimes. And so one we had was over building a new water treatment plant. Austin Water said we need a new water treatment plant. We closed one that was downtown, the original one from the city. Some of the environmental activists said, no, you don't need that. You just need to conserve. We said, well, it's not just about conservation. It's about the system needs of the plant. And so the city council, they did both. They directed us to do both. Build the plant and strengthen your conservation programs. And y'all might be thinking, well, that's typical politics where they tried to please everybody. And that might be true, but first of all, in Austin, it didn't work to please everybody. Everybody was still mad, but it did end up being sort of prescient, whether or not that was the intention, because we ended up, the conservation really helped us in the drought that we soon, headed into. It's called Hancock's is the plant. And then that treatment capacity was just absolutely critical, especially for the northwestern part of the city when we had a crisis that I'll talk about. I think it's fair to call that one a crisis. So climate change is switching to now more into the climate change portion. So I'll explain that headline there, but what we've learned is the climate projections are in Texas more intense heat with more intense droughts, probably more frequent. That increases the risk of wildfire, and then you're going to have those droughts likely broken by more intense flooding. And we've already started to see that. But if you just think, you're talking to people and you go, well, heat, it's going to be hot, you're going to have droughts, things might catch on fire, then you're going to have a flood of people. So that's just what Texas is like. So that's why I call it Texas gets more like it is, but more intense. And we've also tried to look at things just in case if people say, well, they don't believe climate change has happened, don't believe it's caused by humans or whatever, that you can go back in history through mainly through tree ring studies with other methods, and we've seen that there's been really severe droughts and severe floods, but particularly the droughts through the tree rings for centuries in this region. And so either way, you need to be prepared, and you have a lot of uncertainty. Now, this map, first of all, this shows the drought in where we were in 2011. We had a drought that started in March 2008. Of course, we didn't know that right then in March 2008. By this time, October 2011, we were very aware we were in a drought, and that year we had 90 days over 100 degrees. If people around the country knew that more, we wouldn't have quite as big a population growth. But I don't know. But you can see in the and then these are the very important measure there on my left, the inflows into the lakes. That's a historic measure by the LCRA, Lower Colorado River Authority, and those are since 1942. Those have been kept because that's when the lakes went into operation. So you can see the lowest four were during the drought that we had, and then the fifth lowest was in 2006, was 2 years before the drought. We had a flood right after that, or the biggest year of rainfall I've ever seen here, especially during the summer. Then we have two more in the top 10 from the drought we had. You have to go another one at 11, and then the reason we went down to 12, you have to go to 1950. You have to go to place 12 to get anything from the 50s. And that was the legendary drought in Texas, the 1950s drought. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the picture's there, same spot on Lake Travis. That's the lake that varies in volume. And you can see it varied a lot there. But we did have some tools in place, both through the state and ourselves and the LCRA. We had, state requires drought contingency plans. Austin, working with our citizens, we had one that's probably a little bit more robust than some others. And we put our conservation program in place where you could only water 2 days a week. That had been in place since 2007. And so then we put stage 2 is where you go down to 1 day a week. And then what we tried to avoid and were successful in avoiding was the 600,000 acre feet. The lakes are 2.1 million. So that would be 30%. That's considered the emergency level. We would have had the rules in place at that time. We'd had to go to no outdoor watering. You could have got out there with your handheld, but we didn't want to get to that point. And it's really because of our conservation measures that we didn't. We're the biggest municipal user of water on the lakes. And now this is something we dealt with during the drought. The LCRA would put out these stochastic models, And over here on the this part shows that the yellow line is where we were at that time, and you can see we're down this 900,000 acre feet, so we're down about less than 800,000 acre feet, and that the red dotted lines are what, if it stayed dry, what would have happened, what they were predicting to happen. So within about 2 months of this time, which was, I think this one's 2014, yeah, within 2 months of this, we would have gone under that level. But we got a little rain, and just through intense conservation, we were able to prevent that. Okay, this one, I'm going to dwell on this one a little longer than some of them. This is something we did during the drought, the Uncharted Territory. So I've told you about, I said the 1950s drought was very severe and legendary. That was the one, the Time It Never Rained novel that was famous for several decades about Elmer Keaton, about that. Texas was a more rural place then. She had a lot of ranches that a lot of livestock died, crops died, ranches went belly up. There's a picture of a Texas Ranger that's straddling the river, the Colorado River. It got down so low at that point. So we said, well, how does what we're going through compare to the 1950s? And so what is this? This is months, starting with the drought. These are months. The gray line's the 1950s. This is inflows into the lakes. And you can see the first 5 years, first 5 years of our drought, we were almost exactly on what the 1950s drought was. So it's like, excuse me, it was like we're having a drought as bad as the 1950s. And so that was pretty scary in of itself. But then you can see 5 years, just a little bit over 5 years in, they had a flood. And it jumped up over 1 million acre feet, over 1 million acre feet. Then they had some steady more rain. And they still weren't out of the drought at that point, about almost 7 years into it. But you can tell that we were literally, I wouldn't use the word sailing since there was so much water, but we were going into really uncharted territory. And you talk about uncertainty. We didn't know what was going to happen, when it might rain, what that impact might be. So we came forward with about 50 augmentation measures to augment our water supply at that time. A lot of different things, including like pumping our treated wastewater, but possibly back into the lake and pumping it up to the treatment plant, and then pulling it out and pumping it up to the treatment plants. Just a number of things. That was one of the larger ones, and it would have been more expensive, more time consuming. We really came forward with a lot of issues at the time, and eventually worked into our water forward that I'll talk about later. But this was some pretty serious stuff, and you can see we went off over. These are 10 months, each one of these areas. So we were like over 2 years into that uncertainty, and then it rained, and it rained again several more times, and we finally got out of it. You see, it took us about, almost 10 years to catch up to the 50s. And so during that time, I talked about the augmentation that we did. We had we just really communicated with the public. The public really responded well in Austin to this. The cover here is a book we did, Understanding the Drought. It talks a lot about climate change in there. It talks about the tree ring studies too, and we put this out as much as possible. We had a new city council come in 2015, right as we brought this out, so we gave that to them. We always enforce our restrictions. We tend to do warnings first, and then if people are repeat violators, we'll write them a ticket. But we increased both our patrols. We took people out of other divisions and put them out there just to make sure that people were were following our restrictions. And overall, they did. We even have a fifth rate tier that if you're really high users go into, and 76% of that was wiped out. Customers dropped out of that tier during the drought. And we also, there's the thing saying about you need to take advantage of a crisis, but sometimes you just don't have any choice but to. So we, to a certain extent, redid our rate structure. We raised the raise the fixed fees, and we put in that fifth tier during the drought. And so we came out of it, and we also cut our budget some. So we came out of it ultimately a lot more financially healthy. And then we did some things with the citizens on revising water use ordinances, where we went to in 2012 we just did things where it'd be earlier in the drought to act, and then we at the end of it we said we want to not follow this pattern of use spiking back up. And so we put a thing in for automatic irrigation, the least efficient. Those can only water once a week, and had some opposition to that, but it went through pretty well without after the drought. And so this is the way we got out of it. Well, if you're ever here on Memorial Day, be careful, because we have a lot of Memorial Day floods. We've had 2 or 3 things called the Memorial Day floods coming since the 80s. We had one of those in 2015. That was the beginning of the end of the drought. It multiple rain events in 2016 finally filled up the lakes. And then this really is like that game, that at least what we were rolling back there, because we started getting like 4s and 5s, but only for a year and a half. And then we went back into another drought, and with then another flood event, which I'm going to show you about with this next slide. So what this is, okay, the one on the right, that's the Colorado River. It's Town Lake, so it's in town. And this other one's where Barton Creek comes in. And so what we did was in October 2018, there was a foot of rain up on the Llano River. We have somebody, I know Tyler from there now, and had a foot of rain up there, and that ground was really baked hard, is the way we've analyzed it, and it washed a lot of silt off into the river. The Llano flows into the Colorado, and then about 8 or 9 days later, had another foot of rain, more over the watersheds in the Colorado River, but pretty far upstream from Austin. There was some rain here, but the worst of it's pretty far upstream. So what we ended up with, our treatment plants are more used to treating this kind of water, but that's what we were getting. So there's so much turbidity in it, it really just caused our pumps to not work, or to not work as fast as they could. So ultimately, we ended up having to choose between meeting fire flow or meeting turbidity standards. We said we have to meet fire flow, so we had to do a citywide boiled water ordinance, boiled water alert, or call and order, I'm sorry. And one thing we took from that, okay, we knew all the climate models, like I talked before, and we knew you were going to have droughts broken by floods, but what we didn't predict was that's going to come down here and really mess up our pumps at our water treatment plants. We're not going to be able to put out water as fast as we need to. So we knew the broader issues, but there's just some we had to didn't get down enough to the detail, or didn't predict that one detail, and maybe you can't always, but we've tried to learn from that, and we're doing some things at the plants to really be ready to treat dirtier, more silt-filled water. Just to show you, like these bottom lines down here, those are this is turbidity, and those are other floods. That's not average or anything. Those are other floods, including the 2015 Memorial Day flood. That blue one, that's the second highest, that's Tropical Storm Hermione in 2010. And you can see that was only really 2 days up at a really high level. This other one is, the red one is the turbidity during the 2018 event. So you can see that's way, way above anything we've had before. And this slide is, okay, let me set this up. And they showed this earlier, but not in the sequence like I'm going to do it. But so this is monthly inflows during 2018. I'm going to show you how this fits the climate change projection pattern. So this is monthly inflows during 2018. So the first one is, this is the average since the lakes were built in 1942. So you can tell, like I said, Memorial Day, May, we have a lot of rain. June 2nd, we get a lot of rains in October too, September leading up to that. This next one is what the 1950s, I'm sorry, our drought, the one I called not our not our grandfather's drought. And you can see that's way down everywhere, including we didn't get the rains in May, June, or October, and then you always here go into a pretty hot, dry summer. So you can see that. So that second line is the drought we went to, which became the drought or record. It outdid the 50s for that. And then this, I'd say, start out, try to look at the left side of the screen to start on this one, but this is 2018. So we went, you can tell we were way below even our drought every month of 2018. And then you can see July and August really, really low. September went back up a little above average. Then October, we got just totally off the charts, literally. And that's what I was showing you on that's when we got had to do the boiled water notice and everything. So like I said, this fits our pattern. Some things helped us be prepared for that, but we didn't predict all the exactly what that was going to do at our plants. Just around my time's running short, I think, so I'll wrap up just to show you some of the things. So it helped us, though, overall, to have conservation in place. It helped us get through the drought. This is and go back to that dual directive, how prescient the city council turned out to be. They told us to strengthen conservation. We listened to them. The citizens of Austin listened when we called on them. So you can tell, right, that first one, that was when it rained so much, but in the middle there with the blue arrow. But after that is when we had the new watering restrictions in place, and you can see it just doesn't compare at all. We went from like 190 down to 120. You might say, well, what about, that's the average use. What about total? And you see, we're really using less water than about 200,000 to 300,000 people ago. So we're proud of that, and it really did help us get through the drought. If it hadn't been for that, we would have hit those emergency levels. There's almost no doubt about it. By the way, that red one's the population, and over here, and I'm sorry, that's the water over there, and the population is on that side and is the red line. Okay, so then so population. Now, some folks in Austin, probably including me too, just sort of wished over the years it hadn't grown quite as fast as it has. That's a big issue in Austin, but then when you're at the water utility, you don't have the option of, you have to serve everybody that's here. That's your core responsibility. So we're looking at what that's going to be in the future. So we're going from 1 million people in the region to possibly 4 million by 2115, that is. Couldn't even say it. And so we got to get ready for that. So this is just an example of some of the modeling we did. We brought in Catherine Hayhoe from Texas Tech, who helped us, and she did some runs on the inflows and how she thought that would play out over the decades. She first did a pilot to see if she thought she could even do that. This is just some of the rain and heat that we think we're looking at. So Marissa Flores-Gonzalez here, she's our leader of that effort on the staff. And you can just see, I won't read this whole thing, but see, we did it with an Austin way. We involved a lot of people, as many as we could. Like I said, we ran those climate scenarios. Have Richard Hoffbauer here that did he's the one that predicted how the cone was going to fall. And he did the water availability modeling for us that we ran Catherine Hayhoe's models projections into. So now we have a 100-year water plan. I think I just called out names. Jennifer Walker, the vice chair of the task force that worked on that with us, is here today too. It's just one of the, y'all might have to ask Marissa to explain this more, but we used all that modeling, used them in hydrological scenarios where what could happen, and applied that to the lake levels. And so there's some pretty scary stuff in there. So we looked at just, I won't go into all this, but as far as we are looking at doing more decentralized, both on the wastewater and the water side, and we're looking at, of course, everything's going to be conservation-based, and one of the big things we're going to do, still relying on the Colorado River, where our task force and the staff agreed we would still concentrate on getting our water from the Colorado River, not try to pipe any in or anything, but that aquifer storage recovery. That's going to be a couple of decades-long project. We're already getting started on it, talking to people around the country, and it would probably end up being east of town, because west of town the aquifers are more porous, so you wouldn't be able to keep it in there. So I'm just going to keep it at that. I don't know if we take questions or anything, but thank y'all very much.